My name is Peter Sullivan. I'm a PhD student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, and I'm here to present on exploratory work looking at barriers to modern speech processing tools to be used for metadata extraction and metadata enrichment and archival audio. So quick overview. The overarching goal of this talk is really to give an understanding of what challenges are faced in applying off-the-shelf AI tools to multilingual audio archives and where maybe the best paths for research efforts are in improving these tools in this application. So the motivation for this comes from the value of international organizations, archives, such as UNESCO, International Federation of the Red Cross, the UN, where they may have 50 years worth of audio recordings of culturally significant material, and often these have been poorly annotated and are not accessible to the public due to incomplete access. And so our goal is to look at whether off-the-shelf speech processing tools can potentially bridge this gap. And so we'd like to be able to identify the people speaking what language, and sort of be able to use these tools to help ease the description process of these recordings. In particular, this is taking place in the context of the Inter-Pares Trust AI project, which is an archives and AI project. So high level is looking at what barriers exist in applying off-the-shelf tools to generate descriptive metadata. So there's several different sort of domain variations compared to modern audio. So particularly with an organization like UNESCO, which is the partner organization that we're working with, there's lots of inclusion of multilingual and second language speakers on the recordings. And because it's over a long chronological period, you may have speakers speaking on 1 year and then 20 years later. And so speaker ID tools may not be robust to that variation. There may also be some physical issues with the tools. Historical recording equipment may also have channel properties that are different from modern recordings. And of course, there may be changes in language usage. In terms of this preliminary study, we're just looking at the first three categories as a way to narrow down what things might impact us. And sort of our working hypothesis is that all of these things should negatively impact application of modern speech processing tools on these audio archives. So the way we examine this is by creating subsets of the UNESCO radio archives, which is a very diverse set of recordings from the 1950s to the 80s, of which 1,000 or so have been fully described. We split those into a couple subsets. One where there were speakers, same speaker who is speaking different languages on different recordings, and then also a set of recordings where it was the same speaker but in different years, so several years in the future. As a comparison, we also use the second language English segments of the Vox Populi, which is a Europarl recording data set to look at L2 English language ID. The models we were considering are the MMS, Massively Multilingual Speech Model from Meta, and different versions of Whisper Large. We use a WeSpeaker ResNet that's been trained with a large margin large margin trained ResNet, and a benefit of that for speaker recognition is that you can use a cosine similarity backend instead of PLDA, and that has strong potential in sort of a archival application where you may not have labeled data for the speakers. For our language ID experiments, we note that the most recent version of Whisper, the Whisper Large version 3, does very well at recognizing L2 English on the Vox Populi dataset, as well as on our mixed multi-language dataset of the UNESCO recordings. So these are better than what we expected and are improvements over the first and second version of Whisper, and significantly better from the MMS version, which appears to be fairly brittle when it comes to recognizing second language English in particular. We also examined the speaker embeddings of both cross-lingual and then the cross-age setting. One thing that pops out for the cross-lingual setting is in comparing the distribution of same language cosine similarity scores. They all are clustered fairly tightly around a 0.8 similarity. And this is quite different when you look at a cross-lingual similarity, which has a large cluster that is quite similar to the opposite language, but has like a very large tail, which may be indicative of differences in the languages that are being spoken, differences in sort of the speaker's fluency in those two languages, which may lead the models to potentially recognize these as different speakers. When we look at cross-age speaker representations, we note that there's a gradual drift around till about 10 years. And past that, the data is fairly sparse, so we can't make much judgment in terms of the subset of speakers that we were able to look at. But there's a gradual drift in terms of the cosine similarity over that time period. And in terms of sort of our initial discussion points, we seem to view language ID as being less of a need for archival-focused AI, in that Whisper, at least the current models, appear to do very well at recognizing the language. Cross-language embedding indicates other factors that may be at play, potentially fluency of the speaker, and there may be some need to dive in deeper into why some of the language pairs may be more distinguishable or more distinct than others. And then finally, because the cross-age embeddings have a fairly slow drop over time, it may be possible to get around it by performing speaker linking on like a confined time frame. For instance, looking only within 5 years to do a match and then chunking based on that set amount of time. Future directions that we see in this work, definitely exploring better algorithms for performing that linking of recordings of a given speaker, again, potentially confined based on temporal factor. One thing we need to do is, though we looked at cosine similarity as a proxy for performance on speaker recognition, this should be put in context as part of a speaker retrieval or speaker attribution experiment, so that you can see whether or not that gap in cosine similarity indeed leads to degradation in performance in speaker identification and retrieval. Next, there's also a need for more of an examination of both multilingual embeddings, but also just a need for cross-lingual audio data sets that are designed for speaker recognition. In order to examine those data sets, well, a lot of speaker recognition data sets are based on publicly available audio, and often these are in English or don't include a variety of speakers who may be speaking in different languages. And though it may be difficult, there seems like there might be some interesting experiments that can be done to examine this aspect of robustness of speaker recognition models.
You two need to conclude. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just wrapping up. And then finally, a need for more non-English accented speech for speaker recognition. And thank you very much.